Okay, here we go. Stand by. 3, 2, 1, action.
Assume nothing.
Brash, bald-faced blasphemy.
Question everything.
I find it extremely hard to imagine.
Open your eyes.
It is quite all right to be an atheist.
The fastest growing group of people in the country has been measured as being those who have no belief or who are atheists.
You don't have to be apologetic or quiet about it.
Challenge the opposition.
You see religion on 100 fronts losing the argument.
And start thinking. This is The Thinking Atheist Worldwide.
Today's show is brought to you by Loot Crate. Hot on the heels of the new Captain America film, Loot Crate's theme for May of 2016 is Power, and they have themed boxes every single month. Loot Crate is a monthly subscription box for epic geek and gamer items and pop culture gear. And you've got until 9 p.m. on the 19th of this month to get in on the Power-themed Loot Crate. It features something you can carry, something for your kitchen. It features a cool figure that ties into the monthly t-shirt and pin, 2 items from Marvel, plus something from Warcraft and Dragon Ball Z. Less than $20 a month, you get 6 to 8 items. With my promo code, you save $3 on any new subscription. So receive the power, this month's theme, by logging on to lootcrate.com/Seth Andrews and then use my name as the promo code. That's lootcrate.com/Seth Andrews, promo code Seth Andrews. On the show roster for next Tuesday, if you like rock music that challenges religion, you're going to like next week's show. Tuesday night, I'm going to feature a band called Monster on Sunday. Steve and Tally Cass of the band are going to be my special guests. We're going to play some atheist rock music on the radio. Monster on Sunday is going to be playing the after party at the up-and-coming Reason Rally in D.C. I first saw them on stage last year in San Diego, had a great time. So we're going to showcase the band. We're going to play some atheist music on the radio. And then 2 weeks from tonight, we'll hear from Tracy Harris, one of the hosts of the Austin-based television show, The Atheist Experience. I've been a fan of today's special guest literally for decades. I'm so excited to have him on the radio. Veteran actor John de Lancie, a not-so-quick introduction for John. He got his start in television back in the mid-1970s with films like SST, Death Flight, and the TV series McMillan and Wife, Police Story, and The $6 Million Man. TV and screen credits include other notable shows from the 70s and 80s, including Barnaby Jones, Battlestar Galactica, Emergency, The Thornbirds, 13 episodes of the soap opera Days of Our Lives, Murder, She Wrote, the 1988 version of Mission Impossible, and much more. Early film roles include parts in Terry Gilliam's The Fisher King and The Hand That Rocks the Cradle. A host of TV, movies, and miniseries since then. He was a voice actor for Batman, the animated series, The Real Adventures of Johnny Quest, among others. You can hear his voice in the video game, Gabriel Knight 3, Blood of the Sacred, Blood of the Damned. He starred in The West Wing, The Practice, Stargate, SG-1, Judging Amy, NYPD Blue, Law and Order L.A., and of course, he played the tragic character of Donald Margolis in the iconic television series Breaking Bad. Arguably, John de Lancie is most famous for the character he portrayed off and on during the run of Star Trek The Next Generation from 1987 to 1994. A mischievous god being and a shameless scene stealer named Q that even today remains one of the most popular characters ever to emerge from the Star Trek franchise. He identifies as secular, he is non-religious, and he's taking the stage on June the 4th at the 2016 Reason Rally. In fact, you can see his photo beside all the other speakers on the Reason Rally website at reasonrally.org. He is kind enough to join me for today's broadcast. John de Lancie, hey man, it's great to have you here.
I'm delighted.
Of course, we all know you as a veteran actor of television and film. But you are also, and this is an angle that interests me as a broadcaster, as a radio guy, a veteran voice actor. So I kind of want to start with that if we can. John de Lancie, voice actor.
Well, actually, a few moments ago, my agent got off the phone with me about My Little Pony, StarCraft, what else? A new one, Heroes. And I did a lot of stuff with Leonard Nimoy, and I had a company together called Alien Voices, so we did a lot of, we produced a lot of radio shows. I've done a lot of radio for LA Theater Works. I did a bunch of Discovery Channel things and stuff like that. The fact is, though, is that I really don't consider myself a voiceover actor. I have gone into rooms many, many times with the voiceover actors, and they're phenomenal. You know, they come in with 15 different personalities that they can, and when they go around the room, you know, there might be, let's say, there's 5 of us in the room, but they're 10 characters or 12 characters, and they'll start going down. You know, Bob, I want you to play such and such, and you know, and add these 3 other voices. Oh yeah, and then you hear these crazy voices that are coming on. They're going down, and I'm always going, oh please, just one voice for me, my own voice, please. So I'm sort of considered an actor who does well. I mean, I like voiceovers, and I do them well. But I'm not really a voiceover actor who has a real grab bag of voices.
There was a documentary I caught on Netflix called I Know That Voice.
Yeah, it's a great documentary. Yeah, I know a bunch of the guys in that. And I've worked with them. And to sit down, I was somewhere. Where was I? It's some event, and it was the end of the day, and a bunch of voiceover guys and I sat down to have dinner. Oh my God, it was exhausting.
It was like a showcase of voice actors all in character, or what?
They were just, you know, it was all of these characters coming out of them, and they were outdoing each other, and it was both fun and exhausting.
Well, it has to be said, John, you know, the gods, if they exist, reach down and shone a golden light upon your larynx. You know, I mean, you've got a rich, resonant, authoritative, captivating, wonderful voice.
Well, actually, it's a little worse. It's interesting. It's probably held me back a little bit on film and television because it's a voice. And I've never done anything with it. When I went to Juilliard, the first day that I was there, the voice teacher said, "Your voice is so terrible, there's nothing I will be able to do with it." I don't know what her problem was, but the fact of the matter is that after 3 years at Juilliard, I left and it was when I went out into the world, tried to do some of the stuff that we had been taught at school, and people said, well, people don't. In my first job, they said, you know, people don't talk that way. And I understood what they meant right off the bat. The film world, if you have a voice like mine with a timbre and what have you, oftentimes people feel it comes off as being dramatic in a time when people want things very flatlined. And it's the same thing, frankly, in the commercial voiceover world. People kind of want things flatlined. If you're doing characters, then it's different. However, on stage, I just finished a stage play. I just got back yesterday, or the day before yesterday, from Cleveland. And there, people appreciate the way my voice sounds. So it's a double-edged sword.
The beauty of stage is that you have that symbiotic thing with the audience. I mean, you get instant feedback from whatever you're doing.
Yeah. Every day, every performance is different, and we would always come off. We come off stage after a scene, and we go. And more often than not, we're talking about the audience as opposed to how the scene went. I mean, part of how the scene went oftentimes was whether the audience is a good audience. There are times when, you know, they're very responsive and they're right there and you can feel it and it changes things for you. Or you go out there and it feels like you're playing to an empty house and it's not as much fun.
Talking here with veteran actor John de Lancie, and I've got to talk about Star Trek Next Generation and Q. I've got to talk about a character that was on, 8 of the 177 episodes of this legendary series. And yet your name, your face, and your voice are as linked, in my opinion, to series and to the franchise as any of the regulars. What do you think that's about? Why is it stuck so well?
I mean, there are probably a bunch of different reasons. I can remember that after the third day, it was still during the time of dailies when film had to be processed and then was shown in dailies. And that usually took a couple of days. And on the third day of shooting, I heard a voice behind me say, "You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into." And I turned around, and it was Gene Roddenberry. And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Oh, you'll see. Well, here it is, 30 years later, you're asking me about, 8 episodes that I did 30 years ago.
Does that kind of suck for you, though? I mean, here you are doing fresh work all the time, and I bring up this iconic series from the 80s and 90s. I mean, is it a blessing and a curse, or what?
Yeah, no, it doesn't. I mean, the fact of the matter is that for an actor, you need to be known for something, because the alternative of not being known for anything is not very helpful to your career. I have a feeling that it probably kept me back for certain opportunities. But I can also tell you that it afforded me tremendous amounts of other opportunities. So I am in no way complaining about my 8 episodes on Star Trek. It was a life-changing experience.
Gene Roddenberry was not a religious man. He wasn't a fan of religious language. And in fact, there were a lot of humanist themes through the many incarnations of Trek over the decades. Did you catch any of those shades of Roddenberry, and do any of those speak to your own life and perspectives on God and religion and religious thinking?
Yes, to the extent that I think the same way. In terms of watching the show, I didn't watch it enough to be able to say, oh, well, this particular episode, really meant something to me or not in terms of the subject matter that you're talking about. But I had come very early to my thinking about all of this. Recently, I was asked about that. And as a 6-year-old, I was asked to not come back to Sunday school, because apparently I kept on saying to the person who was teaching Sunday school that this doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense. And I'm sure that I was beginning to become a little bit of an influence, or perhaps I was a little bit of an influence to my other little 6-year-olds. But in any case, I was asked not to come back. And then a couple of years later, when my parents sent me to Cub Scouts, the person, it was a neighborhood thing. We went down into this person's basement and what have you, and she insisted that we pray. And I remember saying, I don't want to do that. And she said, if you don't pray, you're not going to get the donut. There will be no donuts for you afterwards. And so I began making real black and white connections between all of this. It doesn't make sense. This is manipulative. I also went to a school which was where we had chapel, and I felt that I wasn't being given the right information somehow. I just felt, I don't know, it just didn't appeal to me. Now, understand, I went on to become very interested in the anthropological things about religion and other people's religion and what have you, but not from the point of view of thinking or believing that any of this beings greater than we are, what have you, created all this, but rather just in how interesting it is that human beings feel a need for this. I just was never someone who did. And I also developed very early on the notion that this was something that was of a private nature. By all means, when I'm in your house and you want to have a prayer for dinner time, by all means. But you cannot expect to come into my house and then say, we will now pray. And I thought of it as being a very private thing, something that actually nobody, you just kind of kept to yourself. And so I developed into somebody who, and I am somebody who's very concerned about religion when it's politicized.
Which means the modern day Republican Party must keep you up at night.
You got it. Goldwater made that comment back then, which we all thought that he was well, whatever you thought Goldwater was, I thought he was prescient in saying we're making a huge mistake to bring in the religious crowd under our umbrella. I'm not an ideological person. I'm a practical person. We have problems as human beings, and let's solve them from practical points of view. And I certainly do not want to hear somebody telling me what's going on the other side of the mountain, from which we never come back, but we're going to tell you all about it. I'm like, please, I just don't want to hear that.
What about your family? They had you in church as a child for a reason.
I think at the time it was just part of what kids did.
But they didn't freak out? Hey, he's stirring the water. He's causing problems. They didn't ask him back. This was not a problem?
Well, it might have been a problem, but they were not. My mother grew up as a Catholic, but had sort of, in her own way, renounced that. And my father was not religious, so it was not a big deal. It mostly was probably evidence. The evidence of any sort of problem is that I was willing not to fit in. I was willing to buck the authority. And they had other problems. They had, with me, which were that I didn't know how to read. I was dyslexic at a time when people didn't. The whole notion of having learning disabilities hadn't been invented yet. So you either could read or you were stupid. And, so I was flunking. And then, so flunking was a far greater threat than, on top of it, Johnny's been asked to leave Sunday school.
How did you overcome that hurdle? How did you get to a point where you could read and you could to integrate yourself in?
Well, I flunked twice, 2 schools. And the second school, however, that's where they literally flunked you. Now, I understand that they don't flunk kids anymore. You don't drop a grade, but I dropped a grade. And then, even then, I went to another school. Then I even left that school and went to a third school. And at that third school, it was made up of a lot of kids who were kind of a little wayward. We were told that if we didn't shape up, the next stop is military school. And it always takes a teacher, one teacher. And I was 14 years old. I think I was in 6th grade. I think that's the year that you're in 6th grade. Or put it this way, you should be in 7th by then, but I was in 6th. And he was a marvelous guy, David Biddle. And he would have these wonderful projects that he would do. And it was a tiny little school. 19 was in our graduating class. It was a little country day school outside of Philadelphia. And he would come in and say, we're going to do, for Christmas, we're going to do Handel's Messiah. And they're all like, fine. We're going to do Mozart's Marriage of Figaro. At another time. And we're going to do, in the spring, he came in and he said, we're going to do Henry V, and Delancey, you're going to play Hal. And I was given a script, and I really had a hard time reading it, but I learned it because I had to. And I went out and performed it. And there was a gentleman who had come to see his granddaughter, who was at the school, and his name was Matthew Black, and he was the editor of the Pelican Shakespeares. He had, I think you can still see it. He edited Richard II and Richard III. And he took my father aside afterwards, and he said, if your son has an interest, you should encourage him because he definitely has a flair for this. So I think my parents at 14 years old, at least my father at 14 years old, most parents are not interested in their kids being actors. But given my history up until then, this was the first time I was good at anything. He took the position of any port in a storm, and he started to say, well, you should act and, do more plays. And so I did. And at that point is when I thought, I really need to learn how to read well. And I went and took an audition for, what was it called? The something Drama Guild or something like that in Philadelphia. And I had my little audition that I had learned, and I went and I did it. And they didn't say, okay, thank you very much, like that. They said, oh, okay, read this. And they gave me material from the play that I would be performing in. It was almost impossible for me to read it. The sweat, the flop sweat that was dripping off of my nose onto that piece of paper. And I was so embarrassed by that I went home. And the next day, I got a call, or my parents got a call saying, their 15-year-old son, we would like your son to be in this production. And I said I didn't want it. I said no, because I was too embarrassed about all of that. So then what I did is that I would go back to my room after school every night, and I would read out loud. And I started off by reading a lot of poetry, because it wasn't all these words on a page, but in fact just like a stanza, 14 lines, and it was very manageable. And so I would read those things out loud, and then I would begin reading science fiction out loud. And by the time I got to be 16 and, was going out, had a girlfriend, part of the deal is that, please listen to me read out loud to you for a half an hour. So I just made myself learn how to do it.
You are a featured voice in an audiobook produced, I think, 10 years ago, an audiobook version of Peter Goodchild's book, The Great Tennessee Monkey Trial, which has to do with the 1925 Scopes trial. Was that just a gig for you, a job, or did you have like a personal investment in being a part of the evolution debate out there?
Yeah, that was actually a seminal work for me. First of all, I did a lot to help sort of edit and tailor that script so that it would be more theatrically oriented.
Flesh it out very quickly. You sort of took the data points, that what happened at the actual trial, and it was brought to life in almost a stage play for the ears kind of thing. Is that an accurate way to put it?
Oh, yeah. It was very, and Peter had done that. It was just, it just needed a little more. So I worked with it because I was with LA Theater Works at the time, and it came in as an LA Theater Works project. And so I just did some writing work on that, mostly of an editing sort of nature and of focusing nature. And the play it used the trial transcripts from the actual 1925 trial, the Scopes trial, which is quite marvelous because the major speeches from Clarence Darrow and Brian are people spoke extemporaneously so beautifully back then. And these major speeches of these two guys are really a beautiful, wonderful example of being able to stand up and just talk for 15, 20 minutes at a time and never miss a beat. And so what the audience would see is that there was a narrator on stage, and there was kind of a quasi-trial room, courtroom sort of setup. And the narrator gave us the interstitial material about, where it took place and the circus atmosphere that was going on outside. And then the 8 of us inside the trial would actually do significant parts of the trial. And we went out on tour with that. We went out on tour with it, I think, 2 or 3 times. Ed Asner played William Jennings Bryan. I played Darrow. And we went around the country. And many of the places, in all the colleges, and many of these places were very much in the Bible Belt. So we had some very interesting conversations afterwards.
You have a perspective or opinion on the creation versus evolution debate, which unfortunately still sort of rages in large pockets all around the USA.
Yeah, I very much do. It's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous debate. If you know what the history of the debate is, it makes it even more ridiculous as far as I'm concerned. I had a very interesting experience in one of the colleges where Ed and I would go back and forth. One college he would talk, the other college I would talk, because these were oftentimes just 1 or 2 day sit downs in these schools, and we do the show and then move on to the next one. And in one of the places I was talking, there were about 100 kids or so. And at the end of the hour, the teacher said, yeah, I saw the show last night. I really recommend that you go and see it. And I said, well, thank you very much. And thank you, the audience, for your questions and, what have you. And then the teacher gave me a kind of a wink and like, watch this. Look at what I'm dealing with. And he said, with a show of hands, how many of you believe that the world was created? I don't know what it is exactly, October 23rd, 4004 BC, at 10 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
And without exaggeration, about 80 kids raised their hand. And I remember to this day, I didn't kind of go like, oh, God, that's ridiculous. Really? Like that. My head just dropped. The air just it was like I had been punched. And I'm looking down at my feet, and the first thing that comes to mind wasn't, gosh, how silly or something like that. It was, 500 years of glorious knowledge that we've learned about how things work, and all the science that we've created and putting things together and realizing, how our world is made and what the universe is like. It's just gone out the window. That was one. And then the other was curiosity. Curiosity has just left the room. And out of that, as I said, oh, thank you very much. Oh my God. As I'm staggering out of that experience, I'm going, along with that, it comes critical thinking. If you're willing to say that the world was created 4004 BC, you're just not up to speed. I mean, this is Bishop Ussher figured this out back in whatever it is, 1670, and he wasn't a stupid guy. He was a smart guy, but he didn't have all the tools that we have now to be able to tell us about the dates and be able to measure the age of rocks, and I mean, on and on and on. He didn't have any of that. He counted the gaps in a book, and came up with that date. That was a long time ago.
I'm reminded of that. Was it Bill Nye, who's also at the Reason Rally, was just saying something along the line, I'm paraphrasing, but, evolution is basic science. Like, if you don't embrace the fact of evolution, it holds everybody back. And then everyone who is embracing science just passes our whole generation by. It's terrifying.
It is terrifying. And then when you extrapolate from that, if you're going to buy that notion, hook, line, and sinker, well, then you are going to, in fact, buy some of the imbecilities that come out of the politicians' mouths or out of the news medias that have agendas that they want to, and then all the conspiracy theorists and what have you, because you have lost your critical thinking. Maybe you've never even gained it. There was a girl who I went back to going back to this particular event. I walked back and that night, told the cast about this experience. And then, we had a couple of groupies there who, liked the show and what have you. And there was a girl who had been there the first night and she was there the second night. And I said, would you have raised your hand? And she said, oh, yes. I said, well, how could you? And she said, well, God is my bus driver. I said, well, I'm sorry. I don't know what that means. What does that mean? She said, it means I can go to the back of my bus and party hardy knowing that he's driving my bus. Well, I threw my hand up to my forehead. I was just like, it's such a lack of responsibility to being alive.
Just makes you want to drive the bus right over the cliff when you stop and think about it,
Oh, my God.
Well, John, you are part of an environment, though. I mean, let's face it, Hollywood is a cauldron of all manner of woo-ish thinking. I mean, at least from the outside in, we look in and we see everything from crystals to psychics to past life readings to Scientology to all manner of spirituality. And that may be a cliche that misrepresents the culture. But I mean, how does a person who is a critic of bad religious ideas fare in the Hollywood environment? Is Hollywood hostile to the skeptic, to the secularist?
No, Hollywood is not hostile to it. Nor, understand something. I just finished a play, a wonderful play in Cleveland. It was a 5-person cast. At least 3 of the people were quite religious. And the people who came to see the show were some of the priests from the writers, the parish that he went to, and some of the cast members who go to church and what have you. I actually have no problems about that. That's not what the issue is for me. I have no problems with the mother who has experienced a real trauma. I have a friend right now who's experienced a real tragedy in his life, and he goes to church every morning, and it means something to him. And he and I talk about it. I make a big distinction between what you believe and what you think. But my problem with this comes when somebody who believes that the world was created in 4004 BC actually insists on gets into a political situation where they start insisting that the school books be rewritten. That's where what I consider to be private thought, where you can think, you can do anything you want and think anything you want, becomes public thought. At which point, I don't want to hear about the fact that there's a unicorn behind every door, and that you talk to imaginary people, and you, because you believe some notion, everybody else has to believe it as well. That's when I think it gets very dangerous.
I think it's one of the points, too, of the Reason Rally. It's called a secular celebration because it's about the reinforcement of the word you used, individual right to believe, as opposed to a state or federal or government or national religion. It's about making sure that wall, the church-state wall, is not being climbed over at will by everybody who wants to co-opt a secular government for their own ends.
Exactly. And the thing is that they all seem to be all empowered by the fact that they either talk to God or God talk to them this morning to tell them, to give them the permission to do anything, whether it be honest or dishonest, to make sure that their way is the way that everybody else has to follow. So it gets more and more problematic as it becomes more politicized. I mean, when I get across from somebody who is a little aggressive about it, and I'm usually not, I always try to move the conversation from what they believe to what do they think. And I have invariably always found this to be the case. I mean, obviously, I watch people really closely, but I go, yes, no, I understand you believe that, but what do you think? And you'll see there's a little kind of hiccup that takes place, the eyes sort of, and all of a sudden, everything sort of drops in terms of temperature. And it seems to allow them to say, well, in a more reasonable way, when you access, well, just what do you think? And people become a little more reasoned. So that, to me, is pretty important.
You are putting yourself out there. The Reason Rally's coming up June the 4th at the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. What prompted you to add your name to the roster? Because
I think it's important. Listen, as we are becoming more and more of a secular country, we wake up every morning to the extremes of religion. And the notion, I believe, that religion also can be reasonable, and that I don't hope to speak to the 55-year-old or the Ken Ham or those people. But I hope to speak maybe to that 8-year-old boy that I used to be, who would just thought, well, I don't know, it doesn't make sense. I know this doesn't make sense. I'm not sure what does make sense. I don't have a grasp for that. And I'm hoping that maybe out of this, especially those of us who are in the business of, if nothing else, I could do voiceovers. I do a lot of work with science things. I mean, we have science soirees over at our house. It isn't even like preaching to the choir. They're all scientists. So we're not, this is not a discussion anymore. You don't have discussions about evolution and Bishop Ussher when you happen to be working at or a graduate student at Caltech. And there's no question that it's the person It's the kid and the teacher, in Kansas, where the rubber really does meet the road. But it would be to be able to figure out ways so that the first thoughts that come into a child's mind are not laced with superstition and all of the other stuff that I often ascribe to religion. One of the things that I try to teach my children, and I think it worked and what have you, is that you don't need to know all of the answers. The process of learning, having a question and then the answers develop and develop and develop is one of the wonderful achievements of mankind. And we should embrace that. And I love the fact that the things that I know today or think I know today, I also think are going to be probably somewhat changed in 100 years from now. And that's okay. That's as you begin to know more and more and more. And I find all of that wondrous. That's where I derive a lot of my wondrousness from.
So it might be a Delancey coda to stay curious, try if you can to move forward without fear, and make every day a discovery. Would that be a fair sort of a summation?
Thank you. I think that's wonderful. And you know what? It is. I often start the day with a cup of coffee, and I go through the Google News. And one of the first places I go is the science section, where we discovered something new. We just discovered something new today. And I go, isn't that wonderful? Oh, my God. It brightens my day. I love that.
By the way, I just put a science soiree at John Delancey's house on my bucket list. It's just something that must be experienced. I'll
tell you what. There's going to be one coming up. I don't know when the exact.
I'm not going to crash your science party.
I'm going to invite you.
Oh, you're very kind. You're very kind. I'm excited to be alive in this particular time. It is a frustrating moment in our history, but it's amazing to see the growing pains. The facts are sort of emerging forth, and I think your voice is a part of that. I think you're giving other people encouragement to speak out by appearing and being a part of the Reason Rally conversation. For those who would like to see John Delancey and so many others take the stage, it is happening June the 4th in Washington, D.C. at the Lincoln Memorial. All the details are at reasonrally.org. John Delancey, thanks so much for your decades of great work, for your talent, for creating so many memorable characters out there, and for lending your voice to the conversations about reason, about belief, about science and the evidence, about moving the species forward. I think it's an amazing thing. So thank you for everything you do.
Well, it's my pleasure, and I thank you and applaud you for putting out the word and, giving other people an opportunity as well.
All right, we'll see you in D.C. in just a few weeks, sir.
Terrific.
Thanks for listening to the show. I'll see you back here Tuesday of next week for some atheist rock music and a band called Monster on Sunday. I will see you then.
Follow The Thinking Atheist on Facebook and Twitter. Watch dozens of original videos on the Thinking Atheist YouTube channel. And visit our website for resources, links, contact information, the editor's blog, and more. thethinkingatheist.com.